You are listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast on the forces shaping the global uranium fuel market, sponsored by Purepoint Uranium Group. Uranium Spotlight isn't just a podcast, it's a platform. Visit purepoint.ca to access in-depth market briefings, sector analysis, and the inaugural Behind the Curve report, understanding when and how the uranium market turns. If uranium matters to you, you're in the right place. And now, your host, Chris Frostad.
It's Tuesday, August 25th, 2026, and this week on Uranium Spotlight, a spot market that climbed all week on almost no volume. Central Asia building both ends of the fuel cycle at once, Ireland reopening a question it settled in 1999, and UR Energy's first shipment from Shirley Basin. The spot price opened the week at $87.40 a pound U3O8 and closed on Friday at $89.30 a pound U3O8, a gain of $1.90 across 5 sessions in which almost nothing actually changed hands. That combination is the whole story this week. Confirmed spot activity came in at just 5 transactions totaling 400,000 pounds U3O8, and the price still moved higher on 4 of the 5 days. The daily path shows where the pressure is coming from. Monday and Wednesday both passed without a single confirmed transaction, and on both days the price rose anyway on refreshed bids, with every delivery location moving into parity at $88.25 by midweek. Friday finally brought volume, with 3 separate deals booked at $89, $89.15, and $89.50. The term market was quiet, with no new formal requests and no rewards, though a U.S. utility is evaluating offers for up to 400,000 pounds a year from 2030 through 2034, a non-U.S. utility is reviewing offers for roughly 500,000 pounds annually across 2027 to 2031, and 3 more are working through requests for information. The long-term price stood at $94 a pound U3O8 at the end of July, with the August assessment due next week. Here's the piece that ties it all together. A newly updated biannual survey of global fuel inventories found stockpiles higher than 2 years ago and less available than ever. American and European utilities now hold close to 229 million pounds of U3O8 equivalent, up 17% since the 2022 low, and financial holders sit on roughly another 137 million pounds, yet almost none of that material is for sale. The funds are not structured to sell, China has strategic reasons to hold, government stockpiles need expensive upgrading before they are commercially usable, and producers are at or below their own working stock levels. So when the market looks comfortably supplied on paper, remember that it's just repriced upward by nearly $2 on 400,000 pounds of confirmed demand. That's what a market with no mobile inventory looks like, and it's precisely the condition that makes term coverage, secured early, the decision that actually matters. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan spent the past week doing 2 things at once. And the combination tells you rather more about where the eastern half of this market is headed than either development would on its own. On August 19th, one of Kazatomprom's mining subsidiaries commissioned the first stage of a new processing complex at Zalpak deposit in southern Kazakhstan, with an initial capacity of 500 tons of uranium a year, roughly 1.3 million pounds of U3O8, and a plan to lift the surface complex to 900 tons annually in 2027. Zalpak is that subsidiary's second producing asset, and the ceremony drew both a deputy chairman of Kazakh's Nuclear Energy Agency and Kazatomprom's chief production director, which tells you how much weight the state places on new tons arriving on schedule. It's worth remembering who owns what here, because a China General Nuclear affiliate has held 49% of that subsidiary since 2021, so a meaningful share of everything Zalpak produces is committed eastward before a pound ever reaches the open market. Set that launch against Kazatomprom's own half-year numbers, and the picture becomes more interesting. Production on a 100% basis reached 13,291 tons in the first half, up 9% year over year. Yet full-year guidance was left untouched at 27,500 to 29,000 tons. What did move was cost. C1 cash cost guidance was raised to $25.50 to $27 a pound, and all-in sustaining costs to $39 to $40.50 a pound, both well above where the company began the year, while the company's new sulfuric acid plant in southern Kazakhstan, the facility meant to relieve the reagent constraint that was dogged Kazakh well fields for 3 years, slipped another 6 to 12 months to late 2027 to early 2028. The world's largest producer is adding a modest new source of tons while its costs rise, and its most important bottlenecking project moves further away. That's not a supply response, that's a producer running to stay in place. Now add the demand side, because this is where this week's second thread matters. On August 20th, Uzbekistan's president told an investment ceremony in the west of the country that the state will soon begin extensive preparations for a second nuclear power plant. And he said it before the first one is anywhere near finished. That first plant under construction in central Uzbekistan poured nuclear-grade concrete in early June and combines two large VVER 1000 units with two small modular units of 55 megawatts each for a 2.11 gigawatts in total. At a headline cost of $9.5 billion, delivering roughly 15% of national security when the large units arrive in 2033 and 2035. The following day, the head of Uzbekistan Atomic Energy Agency met with Kazakhstan's Vice Minister of Ecology, and the two agreed to build a joint roadmap on nuclear radiation and environmental safety, together with a regional training center aligned to IAEA standards. Kazakhstan's planning at least 3 plants of its own, starting with 2 VVER 1200 units at Lake Balkhash, near $16.5 billion, with China National Nuclear Corporation leading the second and the third. The point for a uranium investor is that the two countries supplying the largest single share of the world's mined uranium are now committing tens of billions of dollars to consuming it domestically, and they're building the safety regimes and training pipelines that made those commitments durable rather than aspirational. Central Asia is quietly changing category from a pure exporter of raw pounds to a region with its own claim on the fuel it digs up. None of these reactors draw a pound before 2029, and Zalpak's tons are real enough. But the trend line points toward a smaller share of Eastern production reaching Western hands, and that's the condition under which long-term contracts secured in stable jurisdictions become worth considerably more than whatever the spot price prints on a given Friday. Ireland has prohibited nuclear fission for electricity generation since 1999, and for most of the intervening quarter century that ban was uncontroversial, because nobody in Irish politics wanted to spend capital arguing about it. That has changed, and the reason is sitting in warehouses across the Dublin commuter belt, drawing power around the clock. Data centers now consume close to a quarter of all metered electricity in Ireland, a figure that's risen more than 500% since 2015 and now rivals total household consumption nationwide, with more than 80 facilities operating and forecasts running to 30% of demand by 2032 and higher beyond that. Ireland imports roughly 4/5 of its energy. Gas supplied about 40% of electricity generation last year and wind 32%, with interconnectors to Britain covering much of the remainder. That's a grid carrying a fast-growing, entirely inflexible load on a fuel mix it does not control. The political response has moved faster than most observers expected. In May, a governing party backbencher introduced legislation to lift the statutory ban. The Prime Minister has since said publicly that Ireland is open to nuclear, and the ministers holding to the finance, public expenditure, and energy portfolios have all signed a willingness to reopen the argument. Ireland's Sustainable Energy Authority is now assessing both large reactors and small modular reactors among roughly 30 technologies in a decarbonization review, with a white paper expected by the end of 2027 and repeal legislation possibly arriving this autumn, while April polling out supports for scrapping the ban at 43% against 28% for keeping it. The counter-argument is credible and should be stated. An energy systems professor at University College Cork argues that nuclear cannot address Irish prices, security of supply, or carbon obligations within the next 15 to 20 years, and on the arithmetic of construction timelines, she's right. But that's not quite the point for a uranium investor, because Ireland is a small grid, and even a successful program there would consume a rounding error of global production. What matters is that a country with a legislated prohibition is dismantling it because hyperscale computing demand made the old position untenable, and the same pressure is now being applied in every jurisdiction hosting that load. Each government that reverses a nuclear ban widens the pool of future utilities that must eventually secure fuel, and every one of them arrives at the term market as a new buyer rather than a replacement for an existing one. UR Energy announced on August 20th that the previous day it had made the first shipment of uranium from its Shirley Basin mine in Wyoming to the Lost Creek processing plant, marking the company's entry into full operations at its second asset. The mechanics matter here. Shirley Basin is a satellite operation feeding Lost Creek's central plant, a hub-and-spoke design that avoids a second set of processing facilities and, done properly, delivers new pounds at materially lower capital intensity than a standalone build. It's licensed for 2 million pounds U3O8 equivalent, a year of wellfield and toll processing capacity, lifting combined licensing capacity across the two operations to 4.2 million pounds annually, against the more than 3.5 million pounds Lost Creek has produced since it started up. What deserves attention is the schedule. UR Energy moved from construction decision to production at Shirley Basin in 2.5 years, received final state authorization from Wyoming's Department of Environmental Quality in late June, and shipped in August. In an industry where new supply routinely arrives late, a producer that does what it said it would do in the time it said it would take is doing something genuinely unusual, and it's doing it in the most secure jurisdiction available to the Western utility. The company remains small in absolute terms. Second quarter output was a record 140,873 pounds, drummed against 2026 base delivery commitments of 1 million pounds, with 300,000 pounds deferred into 2027 through 2029. Cash costs of $40.20 a pound against a realized price of $66.85 and $95.3 million of unrestricted cash on hand. Watch the ramp from here, because licensed capacity is a permit rather than a production rate. The question through the fourth quarter is how quickly Shirley Basin's well fields deliver against that 2 million pound license, while Lost Creek builds out the 15 header houses planned in its fifth mine unit. And execution there is what turns a domestic producer into a supplier utilities can build a contract book around.
You've been listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast dedicated to the latest developments shaping the uranium fuel market and its role in the global energy landscape, sponsored by Purepoint Uranium Group. While our passion for the sector is undeniable, nothing discussed here should be considered investment advice. Our mission is to provide a clear, balanced view of the forces influencing uranium prices and the nuclear fuel cycle. For deeper analysis and market briefings, visit purepoint.ca. Join us again next Tuesday for another edition of Uranium Spotlight.